Yes, it is. Right. So I haven't got many questions this week. So if anyone's got any questions, put them in the comments, and I will see if I can attempt the impossible and actually read the comments while I'm doing the live and see if that works. So sorry, let me just get the questions then. First question: how you raised your mood in first 2 to 3 months? I don't know that I did, to be honest. I didn't probably go about it in the best way. I think I just grit my teeth and got on with it, which looking back on it probably wasn't the best way of doing it. Although what I did do was what I've always done, which I kind of picked up in the army, which was to do exercise quite a lot. Used to get woken up at ridiculous times and get run absolutely ragged, and then always used to feel better for it for the rest of the day. So I kind of carried on doing that. So that's the one I kind of always recommend to people is exercise. And of course, it has the benefit then that a lot of people tie in sort of weight loss. But I think more importantly than that, when you're so I think when you stop drinking, your mental resilience goes up massively anyway. But your mental resilience goes up, I think, when you're fitter as well. So the fitter you are, the more mentally resilient you are. So I think that has that knock on as well. Oh, right, cool. So I've got the comments here. So as I say, I haven't got many questions. So if anyone has got the question, anyone's got a question, just pop them in the comments, and I will try to pick them up. Do you think that it makes a difference if alcohol-free beer has 0.0 or 0.5% alcohol? I'm 14 months sober and haven't tried alcohol-free beer in the meantime because I was afraid that I could be triggered, and I don't want to fall off the wagon because of one single fault. How long did you wait in the first 2 years of sobriety until you tried an alcohol-free beer? Again, I'm sorry, I don't really remember. I doubt I would have waited 2 years. I think I would have probably had one fairly early on, to be honest. I personally prefer drinking the 0.0, simply because I like to avoid alcohol. And as far as I'm concerned, there's a lot of really good alcohol-free beers out there that don't have any alcohol in them. So my favorite has always been Bavaria, which is completely alcohol-free. But I tried the other day the Peroni, which was really good, and that is 0.0 as well. So I just drink those. I don't really drink them most of the time, but in summertime it is quite nice to have a cold beer, or just a cold drink. Really, it doesn't necessarily have to be beer, but it's good to have like an extra option when it's very hot. But the point to make is that the 0.5% thing, it's a bit of an unknown. I did do a blog post and it's on the website, so it might be worth reading into it. But the point is, what can happen, your body can trigger a physiological reaction to alcohol. So I've kind of mentioned it, but just to go through the basics again. Alcohol being a sedative, your brain reacts to it by becoming overly sensitive. So when the alcohol wears off, you're left overly sensitized for a period, and that kind of manifests itself in smaller doses, just kind of like mild anxiety. But in larger doses, fear and just depression and all the rest of it. So it's a sort of a spectrum. But when you're drinking a lot regularly, your brain becomes used to the amount of alcohol you drink. So if every time you drink a dozen beers or a couple of bottles of wine, the first drink just tells your brain that another X amount of alcohol is about to enter your system. So your brain's recalibrating an expectation of that. So why it's so problematic, and this is one of many reasons why it's so difficult for people to either cut back their drinking or to moderate, is if you're used to drinking 2 bottles of wine a night and then you suddenly have one glass, your brain's not expecting one glass, it's expecting 2 bottles. And that first alcoholic drink sends the message to your brain that 2 bottles are on its way. So it has to completely recalibrate. So it's inherently difficult to cut back or moderate. And what you don't want to do is to take any alcohol, because if your brain senses a spike in alcohol level, it can trigger that process. Nobody knows how much you have to trigger that. 0.5% may not be enough. If you're like a 16 stone rugby player who's just eaten 2 pizzas, it's probably going to have no effect at all. But if you're, 6 stone and you haven't eaten for a couple of days and you just run a marathon, even 0.5% might be enough to cause that spike. So as I said, I've completely avoided it. I went out once and met someone and had, I think, an Adnams ghost ship, and it was 0.5%. And I ended up sleeping quite badly that night. Felt quite anxious the next day. And it might have been absolutely nothing to do with the alcohol in that at all. It could have been completely unrelated, because everyone has days where they can't sleep and then feels anxious, or, whatever it is. So it might not have been that, or it might have been, I don't know. But personally, I do have drinks with 0.5% alcohol in them, but I try just to go for the 0.0 ones, to be honest. And I always say this about alcoholic drinks and non-alcoholic drinks, alcohol-free beers rather. It's how you approach them that is the issue. If you've quit drinking and you go out with 16 bottles of alcohol-free beer, chugging them back, expecting them to do what alcohol was doing for you previously, you're going about it the wrong way. And you're going to have a problem, because they won't do what you're expecting it to do, and it will probably just put you in mind of having the real thing. So treat it as one of many soft drink options. You might have sparkling water, you might have Coke or orange juice or kombucha or whatever else. Personally, I can't stomach that stuff. It's like drinking for me, a vinegar tasting laxative. But some people like it. But just treat it like one of many alcohol-free soft drink options. And I think you should be all right. But I also say this to people: if you're worried about it, don't have it. You don't need them. You don't need alcohol-free wine or beer. Just drink soft drinks. And if it's any concern, don't have one. Kind of solves that problem, I think. Good day, William. Could you comment on a difficult topic, please? During the last live, you suggested that folks go easy on themselves when it comes to feeling guilty for things they have done while in the throes of addiction. To sort of think about it like it was someone else who did those things. I'm paraphrasing, forgive me if I misunderstood. But could you clarify something, please? If someone committed serious harm, let's say cheating, violence, sexual assault, injury from driving while drunk, I don't think you mean to say that they are not culpable or responsible for those actions whilst drunk, correct? Some folks can be on either end of the spectrum about this, feeling guilty and pursuing endless atonement, or feeling completely not responsible whatsoever and not having to be held accountable. What do you think is the appropriate way to handle and then process such things and their outcomes? Thank you, love your work, and your lives are so helpful. This is quite a difficult question, and we're almost getting into, philosophy of punishment a bit here, because I think it's worth bearing in mind that punishments, so a lot of the things you've mentioned here, like violence, sexual assault, injury from driving while drunk, they have criminal sanctions. I'm not saying people shouldn't have those leveled at them, because part of the idea behind criminal sanctions, it's not just to punish the wrongdoer, it's to provide some kind of sense of justice to the victim as well. So to give an example, lots of people who drink, forget having a problem with alcohol, but just drink drive. Okay, many people have done it. You could drink 1 or 2 bottles of wine and drive and be absolutely fine. You could drink 1 or 2 bottles of wine and be unlucky and kill someone. Okay, in terms of those two situations, person A may have no more deliberately gone out to hurt anyone as person B, so they may not be any more morally culpable, but the fact is they would still be punished, because, as I say, part of it is punishing the guilty and giving some kind of retribution to the victim. So, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of it is just blind luck. So I'm certainly not saying people shouldn't be culpable or responsible for those actions. I'm just saying, really, it's more to do with going a bit easier on yourself. And I think where you say to sort of think about it like it was someone else who did those things, I'm not necessarily saying that. What I'm saying with alcohol messes with our brain. One of the things it does is obviously it intoxicates, it anesthetizes you. And one of the parts of the brain that it acts particularly on is something called the limbic system. And one of the jobs of the limbic system is to regulate emotion. So when you get angry or upset, the limbic system jumps in and regulates it and calms it down. Now, when it's anesthetized, it can't work. So if something upsets you sober, you may actually shrug it off and be fine with it. But if you do it if the same thing upsets you when you've been drinking, you can't shake it off. It just spirals and gets worse and worse. And it applies to any emotion, particularly anger. And that's why there's this huge correlation between drinking and violent crime. So my point is, when you drink alcohol, it changes you. A lot of people say, drinking lowers your inhibition. So when people say or do something horrible when they've been drinking, it's what they really want to do, but they're too inhibited to do it. And when they've had a drink, the real you comes out. That's absolute rubbish. The real you does not come out when you've been drinking. Your brain is Alcohol messes with how your brain works. It changes who you are. You become far more emotionally unstable, far more likely to be angry or upset and to say something regrettable. Okay, that's not the real you. It's you under the influence of a drug, which changes how your brain works. It's not the real you at all. The point is with alcohol is people don't know this. We start drinking, when I first had my first alcoholic drink, I didn't know all of this. I probably would have had it anyway. But the fact of the matter is, alcohol is on the menu for us when we're quite young, usually, and we see it as something fun. And it's something to laugh at, and it's sociable. It's like a social elixir, and really enjoyable. So we drink without really knowing. And I've given the example before. If there was a drug out there that made you kill someone, and someone slipped it into your drink without you realizing it, and you killed someone, you're still, it's you're culpable. You're responsible for that person's death because you did it. But the fact of the matter is, you didn't mean to do it. You didn't deliberately go out. It was the fault of the drug, if anything. The same is true for alcohol. People drink it not realizing what it does to them. So I think that's hopefully that's clarified it. But I think you need to go easy on yourself. If you have done something when you've been drinking, don't beat yourself up for the rest of your life thinking, oh my God, I'm an awful person because I had a drink and the real me came out. And that's, like there's some kind of monster inside me, like the Hulk waiting to come out. That's not the case at all. You've taken a drug that stopped your brain working the way it should do, and you've done something stupid. So it's a personal thing, but I think that's my point purely, that you need to go a bit easy on yourself. And then there's a follow-up question here along the same lines. How do you feel about making amends to those you may have hurt? If you think it's a good idea when in sobriety, would it be recommended and best method to approach these hurt individuals? I think that's a very personal and fact-sensitive question, and it would very much depend on the individual. What I would say is, many people who have a problem with alcohol and have said to friends and family, I'll quit, and then failed, it's probably not worth doing it within the first few days, because you will have said 100 times, that's it, I'm not drinking again. And then a few days later, you are drinking again. So even if you don't appreciate it yourself, other people will appreciate that it's when you're drinking that you do these horrible things. And if you keep going back to drinking, you're going to keep doing them. So to apologize and keep drinking is fairly hollow, and people aren't going to be interested. So you not only need to stop drinking, but you have to make it, the people who you are close to need to appreciate that this time it is different. So that may take a bit of time. And I think people often get upset about this, about, oh, I quit 2 days ago and I came home and my partner accused me of drinking, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that happened to me. I quit only for a few days and I got home from a work do, and my wife said, you've been drinking, haven't you? And I hadn't. But I didn't really get upset because she'd asked me 100 1,000 times over the last however many years had I been drinking, and I always had been, and I always said no, or greatly oh yeah, just one or two, when I obviously it was a huge amount more than one or two. So you tell all these lies, and then when you've done it for real, people don't believe you. But that's not their fault. That's your fault because you lied so many times, and it just takes time to build up that trust. So that's, as I say, that is a very fact-sensitive question. But I would just say you need to have stopped for long enough so that when you apologize, people know that this time it is different, and that you won't be drinking again. Because a lot of the time with this, other people realize as well that it's the drink that's the problem. And until you quit, the apology is going to be very hollow. I had several months sober last year, but then in January, my niece passed away in a car accident, and I immediately went straight back to drinking. The sad thing is, her accident was alcohol related. She and the driver were both intoxicated. She'd been struggling with addiction for a while, only 24 years old. Isn't that terrible? And had just gotten out of rehab a few weeks before the accident happened. How could I turn to the very evil thing that killed my niece for comfort? Trying my best to get back on track on day 6 and started Annie's alcohol experiment. What are some other ways to deal with grief besides turning to alcohol? So I think there's two questions there. One is, how could I drink when that's the very thing that killed my niece? And what are other ways of dealing with grief? Dealing with the first question, when you drink alcohol, that's your crux. That's the thing you turn to when things are bad. When you feel something unpleasant and you want to anesthetize it, that's your go-to drug. Okay, so it's perfectly natural when something unpleasant happens, you want to drink. The times I wanted to drink the most were the times that I'd done something awful the night before drinking. I remember ending up in a prison cell once for the night. And the next day I got out, I wanted to drink so badly and ended up having one virtually as soon as I got out. And that's the problem. It's like it's caused this problem as ever. It's the quickest and easiest solution, isn't it? Because you have a few drinks and you immediately feel better, albeit the better is no more than anesthetizing the anxiety caused by the previous drinks. But that's the thing. I remember reading Alan Carr's biography. For those who don't know Alan Carr, he wrote a quit smoking book. It was actually right back in the 80s, but Alcohol Explained was very much following on in his footsteps. But so his big thing was smoking. And he tells in his biography how he went to the hospital. His dad was dying of lung cancer, and he went in there while his dad was dying, and his dad made him swear that he would never smoke again. His dad died, and he went straight out the hospital and lit up a cigarette. And I think that always kind of affected him, and he couldn't quite understand. But the point is, when you start to understand this, it's not irrational at all. When you are unhappy and something bad has happened, you reach for your drug of choice to take the edge off it. Alcohol is very prevalent in society. So yes, your niece had a problem with it, and you're obviously struggling with it. So when something bad happens, be it caused by alcohol or anything else, it's perfectly natural to reach for a drink. So there's nothing it may feel like a bit of an anomaly, but it isn't at all. It's perfectly rational when you start to understand it. What are some other ways to deal with grief besides turning to alcohol? So I don't know massive amounts about grief. There's grief counselors and all the rest of it. But what I do know with grief is, like anything, if you live with it long enough, you cease to be consciously aware of it all the time. And I always give the example of clothes. Like, you're sat there presumably in clothes, or most people are. And if you think about them, you can feel them touching you. Okay, they're there all day long. You can feel them physically against you, but you don't go through your day constantly in mind about the clothes you're wearing. Because they are there all the time, you cease to be consciously aware of it. And a similar thing happens, although you may not believe it at the time, with grief. It's this massive loss in your life, and it will never go away. It remains there, but it assimilates itself into your everyday life, so it no longer dominates. So when it's there all the time, you just get used to it. And of course, there's times where you remember it and it all comes flooding back. The same way, if you think about your clothes, you can think about the feel of them. Now, what happens when you drink alcohol is, because you're anesthetizing it, you don't go through the grieving process. So it's always raw and fresh when the alcohol wears off. So that's one of the problems with alcohol. It gives this kind of immediate apparent benefit, where in actual fact it's doing the absolute opposite. So with grief, you're utterly devastated and you have a few drinks to anesthetize it. But of course, all that's doing is stopping you going through the natural healing process. And you do get this with people. You get people who say, so and so died 5 years ago and I've never got to grips with it. But the fact of the matter is, if they hadn't been drinking, they would have got to grips with it. It would still be there. It would still be a massive thing in their lives, but they would learn to live with it. It's when you're drinking that it never gets better, because you're just anesthetizing through it. I can't really comment on other ways to deal with grief. I know, as I say, there's grief counselors, so it might be worth speaking to someone like that. The other thing I would say, just with alcohol, using alcohol to try and deal with it, it's so short term, and it's not even that you get relief for that evening, because, as I say, alcohol anesthetizes the limbic system, which regulates emotion. So when you drink alcohol, the first drink will give that apparent benefit, as its immediate effect is to sort of take the edge off things. But as the evening wears on, you'll probably end up sat there crying your eyes out. So it doesn't actually do what you think it's going to do in the evening anyway. Next question is, would you mind discussing your personal experience and thoughts on AA? I've been in and out of AA since 2007. I've had stints of sobriety, the longest being 5.5 years, but I keep going back to drinking. And honestly, it gets harder and harder to go back to AA. It's as if I failed and I have to tell on myself and reset my sobriety date, and I have to start the steps over. And I must not have had a strong enough connection to my higher power. I've read both Alcohol Explained 1 and 2, and the scientific approach makes so much more sense to me. My dilemma is that I have a lot of good friends in AA now, but I'm not sure that AA is the right thing for me. Not sure if there was a question in this, but I'd just like to hear from you. Thank you. So, yeah, no, that's an interesting one, because I did a couple of stints in AA. And what I found was a few things. Firstly, the steps didn't really, I kind of struggled with them. I mean, I don't mind doing stuff if I can see the sense in it. And a lot of the time, I'm one of these people who, if someone says just do it and it will work, I will do it and see if it works. But it didn't seem to really do an awful lot for me. But what I found is, I think what you found was it was the making connections with people, speaking to people who'd been in a similar situation to me. And I found that massively powerful. So the other thing I would say is, I went to a few different meetings and I had a very mixed experience depending on what the meeting was. So I went to a meeting in the city quite regularly, which I found to be quite good. And then I went to one locally in Ealing near me, and it was amazing. There was this one chap there who was so, he'd been in AA for decades. He'd been sober for decades and he couldn't get over the joy of not drinking. So it was quite unusual for AA. It was such a positive. And I remember at the end, he used to make everyone get up and jump for joy. So it was quite unusual. A lot of the AA meetings tend to be a bit doom and gloom, but that was a really good meeting. The other thing I remember going, because obviously with AA, what you normally do is you go in, and they will have someone who sort of talks for a bit, who does like a main share, and then it gets passed around for everyone to talk. And I remember one person there being quite vocal about how, if you're here and you're not working the steps, you shouldn't be here. So get out, you're not welcome. And it was quite a extreme and not very pleasant thing. So you do get a really wide mix of people. And I have heard people say, they've been told they're not allowed to read Alcohol Explained or other quit lit. And I think that's always really sits uneasily with me, to tell someone else, don't read this book, you can only do it this way. But that's not true for every AA meeting. A lot of them will say, do what works for you, just pick and choose what you need. So what I would say is, the connection's fantastic, And there are meetings out there where you can go and you can say, I'm not working the steps, I've used this method or that method, and I just want to come and talk and listen to people, and they're fine with it. So if you find it useful, this is what I always say with recovery. It shouldn't be a fixed menu. It should be a buffet. Okay, you should go in and look around and say, I like that, I'm taking that, I don't want that, I'm going to pick a bit out of this one, and whatever it is. Okay, but you pick and choose and you tailor it to exactly what you want. Some people really click with a method, which is great, but a lot of people need a mix. I mean, I've read a lot of Quit Lit, probably not as much as I ought to have, to be honest, but I don't think I've ever read anything that I've not got at least something out of. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but hopefully it is. Hey there, Mr. Porter. Questions from the Zooms. Curiosity about when folk make mistakes. Some people consume excessively or more than prior to quitting. Long term, not the slip, with lower tolerance. Why do some get higher or excessive anxiety after the mistake? Is it increased from quit shame or from messing too much with the body's chemicals? So the question there is, why is it when people quit, they often go back and drink more? So I think I deal with this in one of the books, and it's the problem with accepting you have a problem or something. But I think the point here is, when you're drinking before you accept you've got a problem, you go out, you get drunk, you stay home, you get drunk or whatever, you get up, you feel awful, but you just go and get on with the day. Okay, so you don't feel good, you're tired, your heart rate's up, you've got no energy, you feel miserable, and that's it. You just go and get on with your job or your day or whatever you have to do. But when you start to think, actually, I've got a problem here and I need to do something about it, you've got a whole load of other things mixed in. You've got guilt, fear, shame, all the rest of it, which makes it worse. Now, that not only impacts the following day, but it impacts when you're actually drinking. So whereas, say you've got someone with exactly the same physical and psychological dependence on alcohol. Okay, person A has not accepted they have a problem. So they drink too much, they fall asleep, they wake up feeling miserable, and they just get on with the day. Okay, person B has accepted they have a problem and they're desperate to quit but can't. So every time they have a drink, they feel the shame and the panic and the anxiety. And what's the best way of getting rid of it? Well, it's just to keep chugging alcohol down to try and anesthetize it. So it escalates, it feels so much worse. And don't forget, when you wake up the next day, that anxiety is exacerbated by all the guilt and the shame. And this is, I think, one of my points about it is, our consumption of alcohol changes over time and you can't turn the clock back. When you start to think this is a problem and it's not working for me, you can never go back to that guilt-free, so-called happy drinking you were doing 15, 20 years ago, because it's changed. You can't go back. And that's the problem with it. Often when we quit, we start fantasizing about it and we're not thinking about the reality. We're thinking about this kind of rose-tinted nonsense from 15, 20 years ago when we were out happy, guilt-free. We don't get that anymore. And that's one of the important things to bear in mind. If you're trying to quit and struggling and reaching for that drink, it's not going to be the fun happiness you think it is. It's going to be guilty, shame-ridden misery, even while you're doing it. What are your views on residential rehab? I don't know. I never went to rehab, so I really can't comment on it at all. I would assume it's probably similar to AA in that there must be a massive mix and spectrum of good and bad out there, and probably depends very much on who you're there with as well, I would think. I think it's difficult for some people because it may be easy to quit in that specific environment, but when you go back, it is a bit different. It's like when they do study heroin addicts who go to prison, or alcoholics even that go to prison, they quit because they have to for the sentence, and then they get out of prison, and they go straight back to it again. So I think, yeah. So I'm sorry, I can't really answer that. Not having been in rehab, it's very difficult for me to say. Do you think alcohol is going out of fashion? I notice younger people seem not to drink as much as older generations. I have often heard it said, if alcohol was discovered today, it would never be legal. It is much more harmful to society than, say, marijuana, for example. Yeah, I think it is going out of fashion. So there is a lot about millennials not drinking and shunning alcohol. A lot of them are choosing an alcohol-free lifestyle, not because it's a problem. They just don't like alcohol. It's just not the thing for them. Um, and I think that is becoming more and more the case. I think one of the problems with alcohol, I often refer to it as the last bastion of acceptable drug addiction. You know, like a few hundred years ago, you could go into a chemist and buy cocaine and heroin, and these drugs were all there readily available. Sherlock Holmes used to take cocaine, or in the stories, he used to take cocaine, and it was just something you could do. And over the years, more and more, we've thought, hang on, this is really bad for you. It's addictive. It's apparent benefits are minuscule when you actually understand it, and its impact from a downside is absolutely massive. So we've kind of pushed them further and further out. Smoking used to be a big one. Over half the population, half the adult population used to smoke. Well, no more. It doesn't happen anymore. And that's being pushed out. But alcohol is almost like the last one. It's, what is it, 80-90% of people drink. To such an extent, people get annoyed when you say it's bad for you. And people get annoyed where you say, posts in the group saying, like people are drinking. People keep jumping up saying we shouldn't judge them. Why shouldn't we judge them? Why should we not judge people who are taking a drug? You judge them if they were sat there injecting heroin. Why do you not judge them when they're sat there guzzling that filth? So, and this is actually in the Alcohol Explained group. It's a drug, and as I say, people just don't see it that way. They see it as something like it's healthy and it's okay, providing you don't overdo it. It's a drug. There's no health benefits to it at all. It's addictive. It's not good for you. Sat there saying, oh, I know, so, they just have one or two and they enjoy it. What do they enjoy? Feeling slightly dulled, and then a corresponding feeling of anxiety, and then having ruined sleep, and accelerated heart rate. So it's nonsense. But yeah, as people understand much more about it, they are shunning it. And of course, what's different these days is years ago, it was, the way to approach it was, do I have a problem? If yes, try and quit. If no, carry on. Well, that's not how people are approaching it these days. People are approaching it by saying, what is this muck I'm drinking, and why on earth am I doing it? It makes me feel awful, and I feel so much better without it. It's a simple lifestyle choice. And people are doing that more and more. I mean, you've only got to look at the amount of quit lit and the amount of groups out there and the amount of people as well. There's so many more people quitting who, according to whatever standards, they're probably not massively physically addictive. And certainly 40 years ago, they probably wouldn't even be thinking about quitting. So there is definitely a massive mindset going on. We're still early days of it, though, which is why we who have stopped drinking are really the pioneers of this. This is the last question, actually. So if there's any more, stick them in the chat and I'll sort of have a quick look. Good morning, William. Well, it is here. Laugh out loud. Day 54. I never thought I'd get here. Thanks to you and the amazing people I've met in this group. My husband still drinks heavily and every evening. It is no longer triggering me, but disgusting me. I haven't socialized with friends, though, as we were in lockdown, and I'm wondering if my brain will do a 180 when I finally see my friends and I think it's safe to drink with my GFs. I assume that's girlfriends. Not feeling that way right now, but just wondering if this is a reality. Should I be prepared for it? Also, this isn't alcohol related, but I'm rewriting your workbook in an effort to ditch the smokes. Do you think this relates in the same way when it comes to nicotine? So I'm not feeling this way right now, but wondering if this is a reality that I should be prepared for. I would say be prepared for it, because then you're fine, aren't you? I would always say, if you're concerned about that old saying about hope for the best but prepare for the worst. So expect you will have those feelings when you see your friends. You might not, because if you're starting to see it as I see it, then, you know, seeing your husband doing it and it's disgusting you, you probably won't see it hugely different when your girlfriends are doing it, to be honest. Just be careful, because you say your husband drinks heavily. It can be tempting to fall into that thing of thinking, yeah, people drinking heavily, it is vile. You know, their eyes glaze over, they become stupid and they stink, and really irritating. And it can then be tempting to think, oh, but, you know, if you just have one or two, or if you're doing it in a social situation, it's good fun. So don't let yourself differentiate it. It's the same drug and it affects us in the same way. And if you take the same kind of scientific approach to it, you'll probably find the same with your friends. They will be fun and very nice for the first part of the evening, and when the alcohol starts to kick in, they will be intensely irritating. And this is what I don't get, it when people say we shouldn't judge others for their drinking. Yes, we should. They smell horrible and they're irritating, and how can you not judge someone for that? Dear me. But anyway, that's, yeah, so I would say absolutely prepare for it. So do you think it relates in the same way when it comes to nicotine? Yes, it should do. There is a nicotine book. There's Nicotine Explained. So there's that to read. And also, I've jointly written a smoking book with Annie Grace, which is having ridiculously long conversations with the publisher about it. And it's just never ending. It was quicker to write the book than to hammer out this deal with them. So God knows, this will probably come out sometime in 2050 at this rate. So that's all the questions. I'm just seeing if there's anything in the chat. Is it a bad idea to post an anti-alcohol message in an intermittent fasting group talking about alcohol choices in their eating window? I want to post alcohol, the last bastion of acceptable drug addiction. What do you think will happen? I think you'll probably get the reaction that you get where you post it anywhere when people don't want to hear about it. People are incredibly defensive of their little drug. And if you post something like that, the drinkers will probably attack you for it. So try it and see what happens. But yeah, I'd be tempted to. But I think you might get a bad reaction. I mean, you could post, I think in the book, I sort of, it's on the website as well, actually. I just go through the ways in which alcohol basically makes it very, very difficult to lose weight. So you could kind of summarize that and put it in, because quite often what I found is if you put something purely factual, so I've got my computer in, about to run out. If you put something entirely factual in, it's a lot harder for people to argue it. So if you put last bastion of acceptable drug addiction, they'll probably attack you. But if you put, you know, alcohol is an appetite stimulant, you know, it's, can't really argue with that, can you? It is. Let's see if there's anything else to deal with. Just have a quick flick through and see if there's any questions. Trouble is, there's quite a few comments. I don't want to sit here for ages. Yeah, I think that's probably about it. Almost 6 weeks alcohol free, and after reading your diet and fitness book, I'm also tackling my eating habits. It's almost like I've bit off more than I can chew and feel like I've removed everything I used to enjoy. Is this well? Is this simply withdrawal at work? Query, enjoy in what way? Because a lot of these things, like alcohol, we think we enjoy them. But when you start to analyze it, is it really that enjoyable? And of course, eating, the problem isn't the eating, it's the overeating and the eating wrong kind of food. And actually, I would say neither of those are particularly enjoyable. It's frustrating and unpleasant, I think, to be overeating in the same way it can be to be drinking too much. So that would be my answer there. I think that's pretty much it anyway. William, what do you think of terms such as wine o'clock? I think to be honest, it is a term people use, isn't it? It's the time they drink. A lot of these things, it's language and what meanings we give to the words. But I think, yeah, it does kind of normalise drinking. Someone's put, I don't remember ever waking up at 3 a.m. and not being able to go back to sleep. So 2 points here. What time do you go to bed? Because it's not necessarily 3 a.m. It's usually that you wake up after 5 hours. Someone else said this to me. He said, oh, I never wake up at 3 a.m. and found out that what he's actually doing was drinking until about 1 in the morning and then getting up at 6. So it's actually a 5 hour after your last drink wake up. And it can be interrupted if you smoke or vape, because obviously that is a stimulant. So quite often you'll get people who smoke, or basically people who take nicotine a lot. They will find that they maybe don't wake up from the drinking, and it's not that the chemical interruption isn't going on, but it's because nicotine is a very powerful stimulant. When they go to sleep, they're not smoking, not consuming nicotine. So it's the same kind of thing as if you're drinking loads and loads of strong coffee and you stop, you're really tired all the time. So when they cut out nicotine at nighttime, they're massively tired. So even with that effect of the alcohol kicking in, they don't actually wake up. That's not to say that their sleep isn't absolutely ruined completely, and they don't get all the sleeping, go through all the sleeping different sleep cycles they need to go through. It just means that they don't come to. So that's the other thing, because I quite often have this conversation with my mum. If you're drinking and you go to sleep for 8 hours, it's not that, oh, sleeping doesn't affect my sleep, drinking doesn't affect my sleep. It does. It still interrupts your sleeping pattern. It means you might not just be becoming fully conscious while it does so. Anyway, so I think that's pretty much it for the questions. I hope that was useful for everyone. I think I've got a guest next week or the week after. I'll check anyway. So I'll do the Thursday post as usual, and I will let you know if it's a guest. As I say, I think it might be next week or the week after. Have a good weekend, everyone, and see you next week.